Straight off the bat, this isn't going to be a very good video. There just isn't that much info available for me to work with on this particular bike. But as I love to preserve history, I think this bike is important and well worth mentioning, so I will try my best. Very similar to the last bike I covered, the Kawasaki Square 4, in 1971, Yamaha also presented to the public a two-stroke, liquid-cooled 4-cylinder 750cc motorcycle. It was designated the Yamaha GL750. But unlike the Kawasaki, this bike was never close to the manufacture stage. Back in the 1970s, Yamaha made some very good small to mid capacity motorcycles, but they did struggle to make a decent big bike. Sure, they had the XS650, which was an improvement on the Triumph monobills to some degree, but it was not a high performance motorcycle. They also had the TX750, which wasn't a bad looking bike, but it was a real dud, with shitloads of issues. Then they had the XS750 Triple. Again, a very nice looking motorcycle, but it too had a few problems. It wasn't until the very late 1970s, when Yamaha released the XS1100, that Yamaha had a really good big bike. And what a bike that was. The GL750 was a 743cc inline 4-cylinder liquid-cooled two-stroke. Reportedly, it produced 70 horsepower. Whether this was at the crank or the rear wheel, I do not know. But as the Kawasaki H2 750 produced 74 horsepower at the crank and 64.5 horsepower at the rear wheel, Yamaha's claim was most likely at the crank. Either way, it either had a bit more power than the H2 or a bit less. But who knows? Notice that the bike doesn't have carbies. It has some kind of fuel injection system. Now, I'm just going to have an educated guess here, but I imagine that the power figures were actually obtained with a carburetted bike, because it wasn't until later in the 1970s that fuel injection started appearing on production bikes. So I'm not sure that this bike ever actually ran with fuel injection or not. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. And before anyone comments, yes, I do know the Munch Mammoth had fuel injection, but you could hardly call that bike a production bike. Anyway, apart from the twin front discs, the white seat, and the fact the alternator was mounted behind the crankshaft, the rest of the bike was pretty standard fare for the time period. Except for those massive and hideous looking mufflers. The GL750 was a real thing, and similar to the Kawasaki Square 4, because of increasingly stricter noise and pollution regulations, this bike never seen the light of day either. Which is quite sad really, because it was unlike anything else on the road at that time, and I'm quite sure that it would have been an absolute rocket ship. Apparently, in the early 1970s, a couple of Yamaha technicians visited the workshop of Australian Alex Campbell, who was a motorcycle and sidecar racer, as well as a Yamaha dealer. Alex had crafted his own 4-cylinder 700cc two-stroke sidecar engine by joining two 350cc Yamaha engines together and mating them to a Norton gearbox. The Japanese technicians were extremely interested in what Alex had achieved and took many photos back to Japan. Did Yamaha make the right call in not proceeding with manufacture of the GL750? Most probably. Because the era of the larger capacity two-strokes was soon coming to an end, in favour of the much more refined 4-stroke engines. But you still got to love two-strokes, right? And if you do, you will definitely find this video on the channel very interesting, because one company did in fact make a 1000cc two-stroke. Cheers.